Good morning. A warm welcome to the Humanist community in Silicon Valley Sunday Forum. To those joining us on Zoom and to those joining us on Facebook. My name is Alex Havasi. I'm Vice President of the Humanist community. The Humanist community is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a secular, reality-based philosophy of life that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. We value freedom, health, happiness, compassion, and using science and reason to acquire and apply knowledge. If these words describe your thinking, we invite you to become a member of the Humanist community if you've not already done so. Membership forms are available on our website at humanists.org. That's humanistplural.org. Please aid us in continuing to present these forums by donating to the Humanist community. You can find out how to donate to our organization on our website, again, www.humanist.org. This morning, Benjamin, by the way, do you pronounce your name Iten?
Yep, very good.
Benjamin Iten will talk about what a humanist chaplain does and how humanism informs what he does. Ben's an endorsed humanist chaplain with the American Humanist Association. He earned a Bachelor of Arts in Jewish Studies from Ohio State University and his Master of Divinity from the Methodist School of Ohio. Ben completed his CPE internship and residency with Ohio Health, including a second-year residency in palliative care. He currently functions as a staff chaplain for Ohio Health, as well as a certified educator candidate. Okay, Ben.
Very good.
You're on.
Thanks, Alex. I obviously I need to update my bio a little bit. As I know where you got that bio from. Just some corrections in there. I keep telling them to fix this on the website, but they haven't done that. The endorsement is technically through the Humanist Society, which is a kind of a, I think you heard from our board chair, Kathy, a little bit ago, who does kind of the celebrant piece of things. It is connected to the AHA, the American Humanist Association. One of the board members has to be a board member of the AHA, so we have kind of an affiliated process with them. I'm now a certified educator. I am the first humanist chaplain to become a certified educator through the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education, which will get me into my talk here. But first, as Isaac Asimov's birthday is coming up, he has a wonderful quote that I love to think about in these sorts of things. He says, "Life is pleasant. Death is peaceful. It's the transition that's troublesome." When you think about chaplaincy, that is the work of the chaplain, that transition space of things often. To become a professional chaplain, a board certified chaplain through the Association of Professional Chaplains, one must have a Master's of Divinity degree or equivalent, and be endorsed through a recognized body. So for me, that's the Humanist Society. They then have to go through clinical education, which is overseen by an educator. And so they are required to have an internship and a residency. It comes to 1,600 hours of observed practice, as well as another 400 hours of formal education. So actually it takes quite a bit of time to become a board certified chaplain. After that education, then they're required to do 2,000 hours of practice independent, and then they can apply for board certification. They sit down with the committee and everybody says, great. To be a clinical educator, which is what I do as well as a chaplain, it takes another 3 or 4 years beyond that process of things. What a chaplain does on a day-to-day basis, though, is pretty simple. When it comes to a hospital setting, which is kind of primarily where I serve and work, we visit the sick, we visit the dying, We visit family members and we visit the staff, and we help them make sense of what's going on from within their framework. Chaplain's work, professional chaplain's work, is inherently interfaith work. It requires a certain flexibility from the chaplain. And so what each chaplain does is, from whatever their foundation is, be it Christianity, be it Judaism, be it Islam, be it humanism, they have a foundation from within their own framework for why they do what they do. And how they create that space of flexibility. Now we can argue about how easy that is from one tradition to another, but for me, in my experience, we humanists, if I can say, kind of have the best possibility of doing this. It seems to create the least amount of internal conflict in my experience as I'm working with other traditions, as I'm teaching other folks. I think for me, part of that, and this is from my own foundation, my own application of humanism, comes from the understanding that humanity has arrived at our current space through the process of unguided evolution, using kind of the terms of the Humanist Manifesto. So it's not guided by anybody or anything. It's not particularly going anywhere purposeful. It's not coming from anywhere meaningful. The way I describe it when I'm talking to things, life is inherently meaningless, and that's pretty great. That is actually a pretty good foundation for chaplaincy. Because if life is inherently meaningless, and then the conclusion being that then we are free, what makes it great is that we are then free to create whatever meaning we need out of our moments and out of our situations. If you're with a patient and they need Jesus to make meaning out of their current situation, let them use Jesus to make meaning out of that current situation. If they need Judaism to make meaning out of this current situation, let them use Judaism to make meaning out of that situation. If they need humanism or atheism or some sort of scientific foundation by which to understand and make meaning out of their current situation, great, let them do that. As a humanist chaplain, that's pretty freeing place. So I may walk into a patient's room, I may sit down with them and do a bit of a spiritual assessment and talk to them, and have a patient who is evangelical Christian. She has been diagnosed with glioblastoma, terminal, and she wants to talk to the chaplain because she is wondering what she's done to deserve this. Because within her framework of things, God gives and God takes away, and everything comes from God, including her glioblastoma, which by all accounts will kill her within a few months. And she is trying to decide on hospice care, end-of-life care, comfort care, or a surgery that might clear out some of the brain cancer, but not all of it, but might give her a few more months, maybe at best. She is inclined to do the surgery, but she is worried that if she dies, and if she in the surgery, which is a good possibility, they're working around with her brain, and a fairly risky surgery, especially given her age. She was late 70s. Then if she died and she was still in this place of questioning God, she was concerned that her guilt, her doubt would separate her from God. So she was leery of doing the surgery or going into hospice. She couldn't make a decision. So she wanted the chaplain. So I show up, I talk to her. She wants to figure out if it's okay to doubt God. Well, I'm a humanist. I'm going to say, yeah, it's okay to doubt God. But that's me from my framework. Um, from her framework, I'm starting to explore with her how she finds meaning in the world. She finds meaning from trusting in God. She finds meaning from recognizing that even in the midst of the bad things, she finds meaning from understanding from her framework that God is in control. When someone is facing death, that is not the appropriate time to really challenge that. It's the time to maybe kind of affirm that feeling that might give her some comfort and some peace and enable her to start making the medical decision she needs to make. So by asking her questions about her spirituality, about how she makes meaning out of the world, she ends up reminding herself of God's grace and God's goodness from her perspective. And she reminds herself that it's okay to doubt. In the Jesus narratives, Jesus doubted, Jesus questioned God. You know, she's in good company of Jesus questioned God, and she's questioning God. And she, in good conscience, with a peaceful heart, came to the decision that, you know what, in the end, while she was inclined at the beginning to take the surgery, she changed her mind. She didn't want to do the surgery. She decided to go into hospice. In part, that was because in that conversation, she was able to talk out with her husband some other mutual anxieties, and they came to a peaceful decision between each other that they wanted to just go into hospice and embrace the end of life together in a peaceful way. My Muslim colleagues struggle with that space because for them, it is inherently sinful from the Islamic perspective to question God. When they enter into those spaces, from a Muslim perspective, their inclination is to disagree with the very concept that one can question God. Now, if you have a patient who needs to question God in order to work out how they find meaning in life, that's a problem. A humanist doesn't believe in God. So what's going to happen if you question God? Nothing. But maybe you need to question God in order to figure out what you need to do, especially if it's consistent with your theology and your spirituality. That's kind of what a chaplain does, those visits on a day-to-day basis. We show up, we talk to people who are in the midst of some sort of spiritual struggle, and we help them explore their values, how they make meaning from their life. And often these values and meaning makings are somehow in conflict with their medical care, or it's informing their medical care. It's informing them to make decisions that maybe sometimes goes against medical opinion. So an example of this would be a guy that I like to call Chris. Chris is an atheist. He was in his 40s when I ran into him. All these names are changed and things are vague enough that we're skipping HIPAA here. All of these are really conglomerations of multiple patients, but Chris, we'll talk about Chris. 40 something, mid 40s. 4 years before I met him, he was diagnosed with a terminal disease, a painful disease. And he was told that he could take aggressive treatment, extend his life by a few years, but it would be very painful. It may not extend his life, but it could be done. Or he could take a palliative care option, that is, control the pain, become comfortable. He was not 6 months from death at that time, so he was not hospice appropriate. But the hospital team thought he was palliative appropriate. We could palliate his pain. We could take away some of his pain. We were not going to extend his life necessarily, but we were going to make the life that he had, which would be probably another year or 2 years, as comfortable as possible. The atheist, who by all studies would typically choose the palliative care route, the quality of life route over the quantity of life route, he chose the aggressive treatment against recommendations of palliative care, of the medical team. So they assumed that the problem was Chris's atheism. Because he wasn't an atheist, he must be as scared of dying, and so he's doing everything he can to extend his death or to extend his life. The problem with that is that studies show actually the exact opposite of that. The studies show that the more skeptical you are of the afterlife, actually the quicker you are to move towards palliative care and hospice care. The more traditional your understandings of the afterlife, actually the more aggressive treatment you take. So Chris was making a decision, statistically speaking, which would go against the humanist values, the atheist values that he wanted to live into. But the palliative care team didn't know that. They assumed they saw an atheist, he must be having some sort of death anxiety. Let's get the chaplain in there. The chaplain, not me, a Christian chaplain, went in, essentially gave this guy the gospel. Chris kicked the chaplain out. Said, I don't want to talk to a chaplain ever again. You guys are not, listening to my atheism. You're not responding to that. And he was right. The course of the treatment happened such that every 6 months or so, he was back into the hospital. So every 6 months or so, the hospital, the palliative team would take another crack at him about transitioning from aggressive care to palliative care. Every single time, he was like, nope. We're sticking the aggressive course. We're sticking the aggressive course. We're sticking the aggressive course. That happened every 6 months or so over 4 years. He shows up to the hospital again 4 years after his initial diagnosis, and now he is hospice ready. That means he is going to be dying within the next 6 months, more than likely. So the palliative team comes to him and says, look, the course of the disease is such that, and the health that you have is such that really you are more than likely going to die within the next 6 months. Let's really move you into comfort care. Let's really just not keep fighting this. Let's keep you comfortable. Let's give you a peaceful and good death. Chris said, no, aggressive treatment. We're going to keep this fight going. Now the palliative care team has me, a humanist chaplain, an atheist chaplain, on their team, or at least have access to them. They're talking about him in an interdisciplinary team. So there's the doctor talking about him, the nurse talking about him, the social worker talking about him. I'm in there and I'm listening to their assessment of things. And they said he really has this internal spiritual struggle that seems to be getting into the way of his decision, but he won't talk to a chaplain. I'm like, well, hey, I'm an atheist and a chaplain. Maybe we can get in the door. So we get in the door and I come to talk to him. So after the first hour of, which is not uncommon, of verifying my bona fides as I'm a humanist chaplain. I'm an atheist chaplain. Do I believe in God? Nope. I'm here to take care of you, to help you. We talked about some Asimov, we talked about Sagan, we talked about Hitchens, all that good stuff. He trusted me, and he said, if I could make the decision again 4 years ago, I would choose differently. And I said, well, you're given the chance to make a different choice today, and you're choosing the same thing. You're doing the aggressive treatment again. So why is that? So we keep talking, and his concern is legacy. His concern this whole time has been he's worried about how his friends and his family will remember him. And so he has been delaying the inevitable in order to kind of keep some peace going in his mind. Because here's what else is true about Alex. Alex is an atheist. Alex is also gay. Alex was raised in an evangelical home and was kicked out of that home by his family when he was 16 years old because he was gay In the process of that, he also decided that God did not exist, and his experiences since he was 16 confirmed all of that side of things. Chris's maximum education, he had a GED. He was a low-income wage earner. And now he had been spending 4 years in and out of the hospital with an aggressive treatment. His hospital bills were racking up. Medicare only covers so much. He was concerned about costs of a funeral home. He was concerned that when he died, his family was essentially cut off from him. His friends would no longer remember him for the good things that he had done in their lives. He was afraid that the memory of Chris was not going to be, oh, that funny guy that really kind of brought us together, who didn't have a lot of money, but whatever he had, damn, he gave it. And generous soul, quick with a laugh, loving, compassionate guy. He was afraid that would be overshadowed by Chris, the deadbeat who left us with thousands of dollars of debt and no way to take care of a funeral home, and which left us with even more thousands of dollars. And his friends were equally, they were all low income earners, that none of them had a whole lot of money to spend on a funeral or any, pick up any hospital tab or anything like that. And so this was at the heart of Chris's decision-making process. Chris was making meaning out of the extenuation of the extending of his suffering, by saying that by continuing my suffering, I was delaying the burden that I would be on my friends. So that is a very Chaplain-y, meaning-making kind of decision. So what did we do? Actually, this was pretty easy to figure out. In Ohio, at least, there is a thing called indigent burial. The state will pay for people to be cremated. And the chaplains, we take care of the deaths for the entire hospital system. It's a very large hospital system. So we knew all the funeral homes in town. We knew the funeral homes that did the indigent burials the cheapest, and they're really good folk. And so we reached out to them. We gave them a call. Typically, this is handled after death. We said, but if you can come in, this will help ease this guy's mind. If we can, assure him that when he dies, his funeral costs will be covered. They said, sure. So he came in, signed those papers. The hospital that I work at has a foundation, a charity. We talked to the foundation. We said, look, Medicare is going to cover 99% of this. And we understand that, in theory, these bills would not, these bills would carry to his estate, but his estate is broke. So it's just going to go bankrupt, et cetera, et cetera. But can we get him some money from the foundation to cover whatever Medicare is not going to cost? Because this is going to help this guy kind of transition into this movement towards hospice and death a little easier. They said, sure. So we got a letter from them with a commitment to cover his costs. Now, this burden that Chris felt he was afraid he was going to be on his friends was removed. He no longer had that burden. He no longer had that worry and that anxiety. We then sat down with him and his friends, and they reaffirmed all of the things they're going to remember Chris as. Essentially, we had a living memorial service for Chris in the hospital room. Working together with him and his friends, we planned his funeral. And we said, here's what's going to happen at his funeral. He said, great. We put all that together. After 4 hours of work with him over the course of about a week, the 4 years of suffering that he had done was finished. He was like, all right, the things that are important to me, the way I make meaning in life, my relationships with my friends, has been healed, has been taken care of. They're going to remember me this way. They've affirmed that they're going to remember me this way. The things that might take that away in his mind, the the cost of the funeral, the cost of the hospital stay, all of that was covered. Took care of all of that. Chris said, great, let's move to hospice. He died and he was treated with comfort care. They took very good care of him. He died a few weeks later in peace, in hospice, surrounded by his friends. His favorite song was Tears in Heaven. So they were playing Eric Clapton's Tears in Heaven, which is ironic considering he's an atheist, but you know, that's his favorite song. They played that for him constantly as he was dying, and he died in peace, surrounded by his friends. To me, good humanist death. The chaplain, and I think a humanist chaplain in particular, was what was needed to come into that space, because we're not afraid to talk about death. That's our job. We recognize that transition is hard and challenging, and we recognize that life is meaningless. So what do you need to do to make meaning out of this time? Let's figure that out. Let's be creative. Let's explore. Let's talk. And we don't come in with our bias necessarily that a humanist or an atheist or an agnostic is necessarily making decisions because they're afraid of dying or death or God's judgment. Another place of challenge of this is this is a new theory for me. There's no real studies of this, but I'm coming to the understanding from my experience that when an atheist doubts, it actually looks like faith. When facing death, especially if someone who was raised in an evangelical Christian home, there may be times, I've had patients where they wondered if they've made the right choice. Like, what if I'm wrong and God exists now that I'm facing death? Christian chaplain hooks on that belief in God and tries to push the patient towards that space of things. I think that is actually the wrong approach. I would argue that the right approach would be to say, well, tell me about your journey to atheism. Reinforcing the things that have created the space of skepticism, of doubt. When a doubter doubts, it looks like faith. And so the chaplain's role should be to move that doubter back into their doubt, not strengthen their faith. Again, a Christian chaplain is going to struggle to do that. Muslim chaplain is going to struggle to do that. Jewish chaplain might have some more wiggle room in that. But you know who does that great? Humanists. We do that work great because our foundation, again, is that life is meaningless. Let's have fun. Let's figure this out. Let's be creative. Let's see how this work does. Now, that's not to say that Christians can't do that work. They've been doing that work for hundreds of years, some would argue millennia of years. Rabbis have been joining in that work within the last few decades of things, and as far as the professional realm of things. So I'm just not saying that those folks from those traditions can't do that, but for my money, humanism provides a great foundation for that, and we actually should be seeking out more influence from the humanist chaplains, and we've been doing that. I'm aware it's 11:50 at your time. Alex, you said that was kind of when we were ending, but we started a little late, so I'm going to go a little bit long. Is that all right? Okay. So, so what have we been doing? So, about 4 years ago, maybe about 6 years ago now, Jason Callahan became the first board certified humanist chaplain. So he was endorsed by the Humanist Society. He made it through the internship and the residency, and he sat before a board committee and he said, I'm a humanist and I'm not Christian, I'm not Jewish, I'm not Buddhist, I'm not Muslim, I'm not Unitarian Universalist, I'm a humanist. and I'm a chaplain and I want to be board certified. Here's all of my work to show that I'm competent to do this. It took some doing, but they said, yeah, great, we'll do that. So we've been increasing our roles. He now has been working with lots of communities. We've been increasing our influence in that space. We now have over 100 chaplains professionally across the country. Not a lot. It's a lot more than when we started. In November of 2020, I became the first humanist chaplain to become a certified educator. So if you think of chaplaincy as having the practice realm of things and the education realm of things, Jason was the first in the practice realm of things. I'm the first in the education realm of things. Now behind me, we have about 5 or 6 people who are certified educator candidates who are humanists. So really, if anybody wants to become a board certified chaplain in the professional realm, they have to go through some sort of education process. The more educators we have, the more influence we have, because we're now working this year. I'm working with an imam, 2 liberal Christians, a medium of the road Christian, and a conservative Christian. These 5 people now all have a relationship and influence from me as a humanist. Atheists are no longer scary. I provide care for them. I provide education for them. They have a relationship with me and I have a relationship with them. That happens year over year over year over year. Since I became a certified educator in November, I've had over 20 students in a year and a half who now have some sort of positive interaction, including conservative Catholic priests, including people from Liberty University, including Unitarian Universalists. So I think that the education route will give us a lot of influence over a broad range of people. The professional route will give us a lot of influence in showing that we can really do this work and we can do this work well. That's kind of where we are in this realm. We are trying to expand that stuff. If you are interested, it can be a lot of work, but it can be very rewarding work to go through that process. You can talk to me about that. You can look up the Humanist Society, and there's a tab in there on chaplains, how one becomes a chaplain, how one becomes endorsed with us. We have 2 different scales of things. We have the associate chaplain, which is someone who has not completed their clinical pastoral education piece of things, but they're pretty close. And then we have a fully endorsed chaplain, who is someone who has kind of completed their education. They found their, they are working on now their clinical, their 2,000 hours of clinical practice outside of their education, that realm of things. But we're working also with the board certified chaplains organizations to not only move beyond recognizing a Master's of Divinity. So, it doesn't quite make sense that a humanist gets a Master's of Divinity degree, but, if that's what they want us to do, that's what we'll do. But we're also working with them to say, here are some other degrees that could be applicable. That would be more open to a humanist degree or to a humanist chaplain. And so we're working to kind of get those things endorsed so that chaplains don't have to go through a Master's of Divinity degree in a seminary and be the only humanist or atheist out of a group of 200 or 300 people going through a seminary, having to learn about Christian theology, although it is pretty useful in the work. But that's kind of what we're doing. I'm keeping this a little bit short so we can have some more conversation, because that's kind of where I like to do things.
All right. Thank you, Ben. One of the questions I had when you started was, can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yep.
Okay. When people choose, what's the term we used here? Aggressive health care rather than palliative care, does the pain ever cause them to change their mind?
Eventually.
Okay. lately,
yeah. Eventually everybody goes into some form of comfort care. It is, the question is, how long is it going to be? If you do it earlier, you're going to have comfort for longer in theory. Sometimes the comfort care doesn't happen until a couple hours before they die. But pretty much inevitably, unless someone, say, dies of a heart attack or something along those lines, inevitably everybody enters into comfort care. Question is when. And the studies show that if you're secular, if you're more of an atheist, humanist, agnostic realm of things, we tend to move towards comfort care and palliative care and hospice care faster than more of a traditional Christian. Studies aren't exactly sure why. I think it's a bit of a I think it comes down, and my theory is it comes down to this inherent meaning to things. So that if the very essence of life is meaningful, from a Christian perspective of things, if it is a gift by God, then they will tend to move into that aggressive treatment of things. They need to extend that gift. Whereas some of us who are more skeptical see it as, again, kind of inherently meaningless. There's no meaning to the suffering unless I make a decision to make it meaningful. Say, as Chris Hitchens did, who decided to sign up for a cancer treatment study research instead of going into a palliative care, comfort care route. Unless we do make some sort of decision along those lines, we will tend to be more towards like, yep, suffering, I don't need it. It's only going to do things that like extend the bills, make things a little rough around my family, make things rough around me. Let's go to comfort care.
I was just wondering if you've worked through different hospitals, if the ownership of the hospital or the staff or just the individual procedures at some hospitals make your work more or less difficult.
I can only speak, so from my experience, I've been at Ohio, I've been at the one hospital system my entire time. They've been very supportive of me and my work. And ironically, it is owned by the West Ohio Conference of the United Methodist Church. So it is a Methodist hospital. Our vice president of mission and ministries serves both in the hospital and on the board of the West Ohio Conference. Nevertheless, they are the pastoral care office at Ohio Health is one of the most diverse I've seen spiritually and ethnically and racially. The secular university, Ohio State University, until recently has been entirely Christian. And different flavors of Christian, but entirely Christian. Other folks, I have colleagues in Baptist hospitals in the South. They're obviously a little less amenable to secular humanism. I've talked at the VA a couple times, the different VAs. They've been more hostile to me than other folks. It's been a journey. It depends on the region where you are. In the process of becoming an educator, you present things over and over and over again. So I had to have a paper on my humanism. It was called a theology paper. I got them to change it to a philosophy paper of humanism, like how it undergirds things. I had a Baptist person on that first committee who insisted that I have to have a theology of sin. That entire presentation was an argument between them and me. Like, no, I don't need to have one. Yes, you do. No, I don't. Yes, you do. No, I don't. So that wasn't particularly a friendly conversation. But by and large, the two main organizations, the education wing, the ACPE, which is what I'm endorsed or what I'm certified through, and the APC, the professional side of things that Jason is endorsed through, have been by and large pretty friendly to us.
Okay, Carl, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to ask you a question. You didn't mention much about people who want to have their life terminated. You know, in some states, I guess maybe in the one you live in, they don't have those kinds of laws. So I just wondered how a person like yourself would handle that situation.
Yeah, I am a big advocate for medical assistance in dying. I argue for that all the time when my hospital, obviously we can't do that legally in Ohio yet. I think, to that question, that the studies that I've talked about that kind of point towards atheists and humanists moving towards pastoral, towards palliative care and hospice care faster than others. I think if you, the medical assistance in dying movement tends to be driven by humanist, atheist, skeptics, that sort of thing. What I have experienced often is atheist patients, humanist patients who want to go to hospice before the medical team is ready for them to go to hospice. And so we've had to negotiate some of those conversations. Sometimes I've been overruled, and sometimes they followed kind of my advice. We had an ethics case where the family was pretty clear that this person would not want to take aggressive treatment. They were intubated and they were on oxygen and on a breathing machine because of an accident, and they were, or because of cancer, and they were pretty clear that given this guy's values, this person would not want treatment, move them to hospice, take him off the breathing machine, let him die. He would have died in hours. The ethics team overrode them because they were able to, there was a treatment available to that person that might extend his life fairly well. But it would mean that that person would have to be on a breathing machine for a pretty extensive amount of time that the family felt was really outside of their values as secular folk. But there are other times when we've been able to make that transition happen, get the medical team on board.
Okay, Greg, I see your hand up. I think you're still muted.
Yeah, I don't think my hand's up.
Oh, sorry, I was looking at something else. Zem, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the statement that life is meaningless. I was wondering to what extent you explicitly share this thought with people who are dying, or is it something that you imply through the suggestions that you are making?
No, the life is meaningless piece is my understanding of things. I talk about it explicitly with other chaplains. I talk about it explicitly with folks like here, humanists, things along those lines. Especially when I'm talking about humanism and chaplaincy and providing care to humanists, I really hit on that a lot. When I'm talking to patients, that's never coming up unless it is a part of their framework. Like if they tell me life is meaningless, and that's great, then I'll go with it. But yeah, for me, that is my foundation that allows me to move pretty fluidly amongst everybody's spirituality, because however they make meaning, that's fine. That's what they need to make meaning. Good question.
Okay, Dana or Jerry.
Yes, I had a question about people that come from a religious background that that believe that their suffering is valuable because it demonstrates their faith in God, and no matter how much suffering God sends them, they will transcend it and suffer it. And what you would say to them.
Yeah, the
Isn't that good enough?
so from a chaplain's perspective, again, from a humanist perspective, if that's what they need to make meaning, kind of connecting to Zem's question earlier, if that's what they need to make meaning out of that suffering, I'm not going to challenge that per se. I'm going to ask them about how they determine where that line is between suffering as a part of God's will and the time when God says, well done. Usually I use Christian terms, so I'm talking to folks like these. So there's a phrase that says, well done, good and faithful servant. So I will ask them that question sometimes, like, where's that line between suffering that is just, that is a part of God's will, and hearing and listening to God saying, well done, good and faithful servant. It's time to move into this last stage with me. More often than not, if they're really holding on to, I will get through the suffering. It is tell me about God's power, God's plan, the way God has been meaningful to you in their life, reaffirming those things for them that give them the strength to face that suffering on a day-to-day basis. If it's causing doubt, we're getting into spots of spiritual distress, which can create some psychological distress for them in that dying process, the transition process. So generally speaking, when we're talking about positive religious coping for those people who are theistic, you find meaning in the suffering itself. The positive religious coping process would be helping them to embrace that suffering is a part of God's trial, and they will be strong, and they are being strong now facing it. Jesus had doubts. You're in good company if the Son of God doubted, that sort of thing. It doesn't make sense to me. It's not meaningful to me. It's not how I would go about it myself. But from a chaplain's perspective, it is not about me and my meaning and my decision-making process. It's about helping the person figure out for themselves.
Would you help them figure out how much suffering was enough and when they could let go of that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a part of that question of, when does God say, well done, good and faithful servant? Where's that line where in the suffering, when God is saying that the suffering is done? Is it at the point of death? Or could it be a little bit earlier? What would it look like for God to say, well done, good and faithful servant to you now? And, that sort of thing. Again, from a humanist perspective, it's not very directive. I don't tell them, like, here's the path. It's a lot of these questions, like, what does it mean? What would it look like for God to say this and to you right now? What would it look like for you to say, this is enough? God has given me enough, and it's time for me to say goodbye to my family. What would that look like? What would that feel like? Oftentimes people wonder where God is. They're like, I can't hear God right now. There's a fabulous story for this in the Hebrew Bible, where there's a prophet who goes up on a mountain and he's trying to listen. And God comes, and there's this storm, but there's a whisper that God, if God is talking to right now. I wonder what that whisper might sound like. I wonder, where that whisper is for you. And then that kind of gets them to start thinking a little bit more on the positive coping side of things sometimes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Oded, you have your hand up. Oded?
Yeah, Oded,
Yes, your turn.
I'm a kind of religious person. For me, suffering is not part of my religion, just the opposite. The issue of suffering and religion connection is done with the Muslim that was dictatorship and people were suffering. Therefore, they justify suffering because of religion. But because the religion was dictatorship. You see now what's going in Afghanistan and all other countries. The same true with the Christian, the Catholic Church was in power, and people live in poverty, so they have to justify this kind of tyranny that was in Europe by religious justification. So, the destiny of people is to suffer. The Jewish, on the other hand, just celebrate life. Every holiday is just eating and joining. There's only one time a year of Yom Kippur, but you don't eat it because you want to suffer. Just because we want to put our energy of trying to be better, but not suffering.
Mm-hmm.
That means suffering is not, when you say atheism or religion, don't have to put all the stuff in one bag. Because if you put in one bag, you find that you have big holes in the bag.
Thank you, Oded. Yeah.
And so I think atheism have its own place, and rejection of religions is justified in some places. So when some religion try to force you to kind of missionary, either Christian or Muslim, that force people to be following this religion. In my religion, actually just the opposite. My wife, when she wanted to convert, she had to wait more than 7 years of studying, and only then she was able to convert. That means it's not forcing, just the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
and this kind of thing that make me sometimes in this community of atheism to be the unusual branch, because it's kind of given that if you're religious, you don't have brain, you don't have science. It's incorrect, to my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, to that last point, the assumption that if you're religious or theistic, that you don't have, understand science or whatever. I think that's, or that you don't, I think that is a canard, I think I know very many good theistic folks who are much more scientifically minded than I am, and understand all of that stuff much more than I do. To the question of suffering and using religion being used in tyranny, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think religion has been often used to justify being allowing others to suffer or imposing suffering on other folk because they don't agree with me or because there's some sort of difference. I mean, the joys of chaplaincy work is that when done well, when done right, there is no imposing. The question of suffering, if I'm with a Jewish patient who loves life, who's celebrating life, who is who remembers the blessings of God, that's where I go with them, right? There are also many great rabbinic stories of people accepting God's goodness and celebrating life in the midst of suffering. my background, I was raised Christian. I majored in Jewish studies, so I kind of have the blessing of being able to switch between those two and humanism pretty quickly and easily. But yeah, I think you're right. Judaism has a wonderful celebration of life and suffering in a way that, you know, maybe more traditional Christianity does not. But it's yeah.
Other little comments. The Old Testament, some people say, oh, this is very bad, it's not scientific. My teacher, the first time when I learned, said, the Bible, the Old Testament is not science book, it's not history book, it's a moral book.
I would argue it's really none of those, but yeah, I think that I think it is not, it's absolutely not a science book, from my perspective anyway.
Mine too.
Yeah, and you know, I think from the Jewish tradition in particular, like the rabbinic tradition of Judaism, yeah, I mean, those rich stories, the midrash, the different ways that the Talmud kind of riffs on some of the very small nuances of Hebrew is really creative and fun.
But I think this was study for the purpose of study. And this is not exactly, because when you read the prophets, all what they teach is humanistic, moral, ethics, nothing else. They don't say, forget all the other kind of stuff of what we have today. What is important is how you treat other people.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that. I think there is also some pretty inhumane things in the prophets as well. Wishing the one's enemies to be wiped out, other things along those lines. But I think that of the Hebrew Bible, the prophets are by far the most amenable to me.
Because the enemies that have to be destroyed is the ones that kill children.
Yes, and within the Hebrew Bible, there is also many wishings for the God of the Israelites to bash babies on stones. The Hebrew Bible is not without its own religious complications.
But think about the prophets.
Yes, and the Tanakh though is the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, right? It is all of that together, and even within the prophets, you know, I'm a pretty Oded. I'm a pretty staunch pacifist, so you're gonna get me hard pressed to wish my enemies to be smashed to bits. But
exactly what I say. Life is important.
yes,
Enemies want to kill me just because they want to kill me, and my first command is to keep my life.
yes, the moral calculus of pacifism gets really complicated when you start wondering about secondary violence and allowing others to kill me and the violence that imposes upon me and my family. You know, I completely, yeah, it is a complicated calculus, but I think we're getting a little far afield. But I'm enjoying our conversation though.
You know, I was just thinking, Ben, you must have some really great conversations with your, what do you call them, patients, clients?
Patients, yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do. I mean, very rarely do they know that I'm a humanist or an atheist. Usually it's just the chaplain, and that allows them to project onto me whatever they need me to be. But yeah, I mean, you get to have some really fun conversations, some real working out. If you're willing to be creative and sit with it a little bit, it can be pretty fun.
I was thinking about the story. You said you asked some patients how they reached their conclusions about the meaning of life.
Mm-hmm.
And do you see much of a difference in people there?
Yeah, I inevitably, in my experience, it is when I'm asking those questions, everybody has some sort of different story that they tell me, that either affirms their belief in God or affirms their lack of belief in God. And so, and usually it comes around some form of protection or lack of protection. And God protected me in this scenario, or I was in this midst of suffering and God didn't protect me. So I decided if God was loving, then God would have protected me in this. And because God did not, God must not exist. Further experience has gone on. Because of that, I went on to learn about evolution and other scientific things. And I've come to the conclusion that, yeah, my initial conclusion to atheism was experiential, but it is also backed by all sorts of other things. And the same thing on the theistic side, God protected me in this moment. Thus, no matter whatever my doubts might be, I will hold on to the understanding that God will protect me, even if I don't see that protection now. And so sometimes some of that work is, well, tell me how God has protected you in the past, and how might God protect you now? Well, God might do this, God might do that. Well, okay, great. So let's go do that.
Yeah, okay. I've come to the conclusion at some point, or just the idea struck me a while back, that this this whole question of the meaning of life is kind of like, how should I play this game?
I've never
What
thought of it
are
like
the
that, but
rules
yeah.
of it? Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's a good way to put it. How should I play this game? What are the rules that I want to play by?
And what is winning and what is losing?
Yeah. I think of it a lot in my conversations, like what values, instead of like what rules. I usually think like, what values do I want to live by? What's important to me in these different moments, and how I want to make decisions. Yeah, what's winning, what's losing? That's loaded terms for me, but yeah.
The other thing I would think people are concerned about is the one you brought out is what is the right thing to do for my friends, for my loved ones?
Yeah. How will people remember me?
Yeah.
Especially within the skeptical world of things, since there is not there tends to not be a belief in the afterlife. That question of legacy, how am I remembered, tends to be the foremost question and concern for folks as they're facing death. And so a lot of times that care is spent doing life review with the patients, kind of helping them remind themselves of the good they've done in the world. It does get sticky when you're dealing with a real jerk. He doesn't have a whole lot to remind themselves that they did some good in the world. But I can't say I've completely struck out before, but sometimes you have to really dig.
Yeah, that's the appeal, I guess, of It's a Wonderful Life, the movie.
Right.
It's a great movie regardless.
Yeah. I'm you have me thinking of maybe I should have a chaplaincy. Use that movie in education with some chaplain students. Could have some good fruitful conversations around that.
Yeah, I've had someone tell me once that she envied my belief, my certainty that there's no afterlife.
Yeah,
That's not expressed a lot, but I think it's
I agree. There is I think we secular folk tend to sell ourselves short on that regard. I think of, I think it's Alain de Bontemps' little book of atheist spirituality, where I think he expresses a common trope of the one thing that Christianity or that theists have on us is the belief in the afterlife. And actually, as Isaac Asimov says, I don't want to, hell's like an awful place and heaven sounds boring, so I don't want to be in either place. And it's, yeah, I think not believing in an afterlife puts a whole lot, instills actually a whole lot of meaning into the life that we live. It gives us a drive to live purposefully. It can give us a drive to think about these questions of how am I treating those around me? How am I going to be remembered? How am I treating the planet? There is less excuse, if I can use some words I might not use in more interfaith settings. There's less excuse for treating things poorly, because there's no God to forgive me for the stuff that I've done. There's no ultimate reward or punishment. It's like I can see pretty quickly right now if something is getting rewarded or punished. I get pretty immediate feedback from my wife when I'm not doing great.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Does anyone else like to comment on I think it's been a great talk and very interesting. And what I want to do is go to gallery view. And what am I looking for here? Yeah, there are several people who haven't spoken up at all. Marion, did you have anything you want to ask or comments you'd like to make? Chuck? You're
Oh,
muted.
thanks for the opportunity. Sure. One question, and maybe you could just, how do you help people that really have no community or no family that are really going out on their own? What's the best advice or, thing you can help them with as an atheist kind of dying on your, we all die alone, but, it's even worse if you're the only family member left.
Yeah. Legacy can take all sorts of different things. When you're talking legacy, ideas that have been left behind. I've never met anybody that is completely relationship-less as they are facing death. I've met a couple that have been pretty damn close. But and sometimes from their own bad choices, having impacts on their family, and so being so cut off from their family that the family doesn't want to talk to them. So when we're talking about those stories of like people who are jerks, like trying to grasp to that one, like what is that one thing that's really going to like be okay with me in my life?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, in between that and being one of 7 billion in a long line of billions of people is, kind of back to the meaningless part you were talking about earlier. It just gets overwhelming when you start thinking about it.
Yeah, it can be it can be overwhelming. There's a fine line between overwhelming and awe.
Yeah, especially when you compare to the size of the universe and the number of galaxies and planets. I mean, it is, just dumb luck that we're here having this discussion today.
Right. And that kind of gives me goosebumps. Like that's it.
Awe-inspiring, as you said. Totally.
Yeah.
Makes you even religious.
Some might say.
Marion.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I have been here listening the whole time, but I didn't realize my mute thing was on the wrong toggle part. But yeah, I really like the last question especially. But I just wanted to say I'm really glad that we have this topic that we're covering. It's very important, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Marion.
So call in users. Is that you, Alfred? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, to promote future conversations, a lot of these questions of awe and creating meaning and using religious terms like transcendent and I might even throw in salvation, salvific effect of some kinds is a part of kind of my conversations on living a meaningful life. As we talk about living a meaningful life from a humanist foundation. I would argue that humanism does have a transcendence. It is space-time. That's a pretty freaking transcendent. When we think about the space of time that humanity has been on the earth and will continue on, the earth and the universe will continue on after, the history of evolution is that species will become extinct. Humanity's extinction is inevitable. Hundreds of thousands of years from now, it is quite possible that humanity will no longer exist. Not just because we've destroyed the planet, although that is a possibility of how we get there, but just by the very progress of evolution. And I think when we think of things like transcendence and awe and the values that we use to live our daily lives, I would argue that humanism provides a pretty strong foundation for that. If we are willing to kind of think about it and live into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I find whenever I think about things that might end, about things coming to an end, there's something sad about that, I mean, I've kind of accepted a long time ago that I will.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the idea that someday the earth may become uninhabitable and there'll be no more people, that bothers me a bit.
Yeah.
This was it dark energy that's going to expand the universe until nothing can interact. That's sad. But I'll get over that too eventually, I'm sure. Or I'll die. Just getting over
Or you'll
it.
die and then you won't care anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tell people, they say, so what do you think you'll do after you're dead? Well, if I want to, I'll just get up. But I don't think I'm going to want to.
You've earned some rest.
Yeah. Marion?
Well, that actually doesn't bother me so much, the end of the world idea, because I think that, if that's, I guess, I don't know how this sounds exactly, but if that's what's going to be, that's what's going to be, it's like, okay. But what really bothers me more is that it just seems we never, ever, ever get over killing each other in wars and, and in other situations, like torturing each other or just being really mean to each other even. That bothers me a lot more. And it seems like we just keep doing it.
Yeah. The ethics of empathy and the way empathy can inform our ethics and caring for other, both not even just interpersonal on a one-to-one basis, but in where we draw our boundaries of our tribes and kind of the latent tribalism kind of within the human spirit, it seems like, where everybody else is out. And who is an insider and who is an outsider. And, humanism's reminder that we are all connected by our humanity. And we are all individuals. Kind of this balance of our connectedness and our individuality are both valuable and important. And when I'm doing my chaplaincy work, negotiating those two sides of things is often what, especially if you're dealing with a family in conflict with two different values kind of informing decisions, that can often be a good point of exploration of how are you, you all want to take care of Aunt Bessie. You all want the best for her. I wonder what Aunt Bessie would say is the best for her. And we're celebrating the connectedness of both sides kind of arguing with each other, that they all have the same goal. They want the best for this person. They both love them. They're manifesting that love in completely different ways right now. And we're also going to honor the individuality of the patient and say, well, what would she want? And maybe that concedes one side over the other. Or maybe she would want something third altogether, and both sides have to compromise into something that is completely different. But yeah, I think when we're also talking about living a meaningful life in a meaningless world, empathy and ethics and caring for each other and the planet and not being afraid of words like transcendence and that sort of thing, I think are important ways for humanists to kind of create a framework so that we're not, I mean, in my mind, what makes humanism different from atheism is that, atheism is a statement about whether or not God exists. Humanism is about how that atheist wants to live out their life. It is, the manifesto, the Humanist Manifesto, the third one anyway, describes humanism as a philosophy of life. That means it's arguing that there is a way to live life from a humanist perspective. I think historically humanism has been on the argument of trying to defend itself against theists. And so a lot of the arguments has been not God, not God, not God, not God, not arguing about how it offers a philosophy of life for folks. And so I think we're starting to see that turn the corner a bit, but I do think that there's a lot to humanism that can inform how we live and allow for a diversity of the different values that come out of humanism, that we can have a billion humanists making a billion different decisions and all sort of living out of the same values.
Okay. Greg, is it time to unmute everyone? I don't think it's going to make much of a difference.
I can do that.
Okay. So if there's anyone who's been too shy to speak up, this is your chance.
Well,
Marion.
so if you want to make sure that you have a humanist end of life person when you're at your end of life, is that just something to put in your advance directive, or where do you sort of get it away while you're still well and can make this decision?
Yeah, my Snyder mark is good luck. But you could, for people within my community, I have 3 or 4 people who have given me their end of life preferences as a chaplain within the community. If you reach out to the Humanist Society, we do have several chaplains in California, which I believe is where you good folks are at. There is not if you don't have a humanist chaplain in your space, it's going to be hard to make that claim of things. I will say this, that if you are working with a board certified chaplain, I would trust them, regardless of their foundation.
I'm not sure what you mean by that last sentence, because I meant like before you ever maybe go into the hospital, or you just want it known that this is something that you would like
Yeah.
done, and not that you're already working with a board certified
Yeah.
chaplain. And
Um,
can you ask? I mean, I don't know when you can ask for one.
yeah.
What are the
You can-
qualifications for even getting one? Are there qualifications like, sorry, you really only have a sprained ankle, so no, we're not going to get you a I mean,
You can talk to a chaplain whenever you want. A lot of chaplain work is just rounding, kind of cold calling on doors, saying, "Hey, how you doing? What's going on? Do you want to talk to anybody?" If you want a specific humanist chaplain, you should be able to talk to the chaplain in the hospital you're in and say, "Hey, I'm a humanist. Can you get me a humanist chaplain?" Statistically speaking, more than likely, they're going to say, "We don't have a humanist chaplain, but I'd be glad to help." And 9 times out of 10, they're going to be able to help you out. But if you say, well, can you reach out to the Humanist Society and see if they can get me in contact with a humanist chaplain, they should be able to do that. And I can say that humanist societies our employees and board, of which I am a part, we would bend over backwards to do what we can to get you at least in contact, probably by the phone or Zoom or something like that, with a humanist chaplain.
Or are you like registered with the hospital, various hospitals? And
So no, the certification is a national certification, but I am endorsed through the Humanist Society, so they're kind of the umbrella, and I'm employed at the hospital. So the people in my region know me. So when they have questions about humanism and they have somebody who needs a humanist chaplain, I often get phone calls or emails saying, "Hey, Ben, can you come talk to my patient, or can you call this patient and talk to them?" But the best registry for humanist chaplains would be through the Humanist Society. You can either do that through the web page. There's a list of endorsed chaplains and celebrants, or through reaching out to the contact us button there, and that will get to Kristen, one of our employees, and she will reach out to us, which I think is kind of how you got to us to begin with, Alex.
do you, I'll get to you in a minute. I just one more quick question. Do you meet with other chaplains, non-humanist chaplains? Is there, a chaplain
Yeah.
coffee house or something that you go to?
Yeah, actually, we do have, since COVID hit, an online happy hour every other Friday that we kind of hang out and chat. There is, I have good friends that I went to my residency with that I hang out and talk to. Again, I do talks about what I cheekily call spiritual care for non-believers, or spiritual care for secular patients. I give that didactic to hospitals all over the place. And so in those regards, I talk to chaplains about humanism and that sort of thing. Our national conference in May for both the professional and the education side of things is in May, and I'm going to be doing an anti-atheist bias workshop and how that impacts spiritual care and CPE, clinical pastoral education. So we're doing the good work as much as we can, building those relationships across people, different traditions.
yeah. It's a simple question. When you say Humanist Society, do you mean the AHA, or do you mean a different?
I mean a different organization. It's the Humanist Society.
That's the name of it, the Humanist Society. That's what we would Google.
Yeah. If if you Google Humanist Chaplain, you should get directed to the Humanist Society. Again, so if you think of it, maybe the AHA is sort of the larger umbrella of things. The Humanist Society is its own entity, but it's connected. Somebody, a part of our structure, we require that one person from our board is also on the board of the AHA. And so in some ways, they are our parent organization.
Okay.
But yeah,
Thank you.
we are technically our own thing.
Thanks.
To what extent do you help or can help people with mental illness, like people suffering from depression or suffering from anxiety, or maybe something more serious?
Yeah. I within the practice of the hospital, I do that a lot. Thanks, Greg. Yes, that is the right address there. We have behavioral health units in many of our hospitals. And so there are oftentimes when, we're called on to chat with people who are experiencing depression, anxiety, talk to many people with bipolar disorder, hyperspirituality as a result of that bipolar disorder. There is a part of, for me, of my expression of humanism, of this sort of radical trust of the other person. For me, that trust even extends to folks like who are experiencing extreme depression, who may have survived an attempt at suicide, or who are anxious and find it a difficult way to get out of the house, even on a day-to-day basis. The bipolar disorders, or with the kind of extreme hyper-spirituality, is a little bit more tricky because that kind of can be where you get into some messianic, they see themselves as the Messiah sometimes, or especially chosen by God. And so there is a fine line of not wanting to reinforce the delusion, but still kind of working from within the delusion to kind of help them kind of find some firm footing. That's a bit more of a challenge, a fun challenge in my mind, but a challenge. Some folks have set up like themselves. Some humanist chaplains are also licensed therapists, and so they kind of deal with some of that stuff through their therapeutic practice. I am not. Some chaplains have also set themselves up as like spiritual advisors from a humanist perspective, and they might deal with some of that as well. I would hope that ultimately they would refer their patients to, again, a licensed therapist or counselor, but there is some bleed over. I tend to stick to a hospital and what is needed in the hospital, but there are others who kind of do more at home or kind of personal care. It can be funly, radically disorienting to tell somebody who has historically not been trusted because of their anxiety and depression that you trust them. I've seen some people really kind of just latch onto that and make radical changes in their life from that aspect of things. If you've been told that you're not trustworthy by everybody around you, and that feeds into your depression, to even just have somebody, especially somebody who wears a chaplain badge, to say, "Oh no, I think you're trustworthy," and kind of help them tell the stories of where they've been trustworthy in their own lives. It can have radical change.
Do you ever worry that when you're offering service to someone and you don't, they're religious and you don't tell them you're a humanist, you ever worry that you're reinforcing a prejudice against atheists? That these understanding people are believers?
Yeah, I will challenge. I do challenge sometimes when you get those folks who are like, I don't understand how anybody can do this without God. Or if they do some sort of pejorative against atheists or humanists, usually it's an atheist or people who don't believe in God, I will live into that challenge of space and go like, well, a lot of people do find meaning. They might find meaning in their relationships with other people. They might, and I kind of throw out some ways that other people might find meaning in their life beyond God. And they either pick up the hints that that's not an appropriate way to talk with me about these things, or they double down and I will just excuse myself from the room and find them a chaplain who might help them better than I can. But yeah. That doesn't happen a whole lot, but that does happen.